Good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Coffee and Something Stronger. My name is Codi Norred, Executive Director of Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Coffee and Something Stronger is a coffee chat style interview show where we sit down with faith leaders, elected officials, social justice practitioners, and talk at the intersections of faith, climate, and justice. And this morning we have on a very special guest I'm excited about, a good friend of Gipple and a good friend of all of this work, has been doing this work for a really long time. None other than President Susan Hendershot, the president of Interfaith Power and Light. Thanks so much for joining, Reverend.
Thank you for the invitation to be here.
So why don't we start? I think you have brought a reading for us this morning, so why don't we start with your grounding?
I have, and I'm excited because it's a reading from one of your Georgia's native sons, John Lewis, from this little book published last year called Carry On. And the reading I brought today is called On Voting. Vote, 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 vote. Write that in capital letters in your notes, all over the page. Remember the time when the right to vote was denied us? I do. And once we could vote, there were lines and lines and lines to register. We can't afford to let democracy slip away. We fought for that right, demonstrated with bandages on our heads. We fought to prevent changes to the Voting Rights Act and then to restore it. We were weary, tired, but we had purpose. Don't take this right for granted. Don't squander it. Keep building. A vote is your voice being heard. A vote is your power. A vote is your change. A vote is sacred. Go out there and vote.
Amen. Thank you, Susan. So what about that passage for you is important, and why did you want to bring it this morning? What does it mean to you?
Well, first of all, I mean, John Lewis was just an amazing human being, and I think demonstrated to me this interconnection between one's faith and how one can live that out in the world. And of course, the way he did that was through politics, for which we are very grateful. But that quote in particular, you know, I love his framing of a vote is sacred. And I think that what he meant by that is that it should be regarded with great respect, that it should not be dishonored. And as he says, it definitely should not be taken for granted, as people have fought hard for the right to vote. And this includes many religious people, as we know, over a long journey of time within the US and certainly in other places in the world as well. So I just really appreciate his framing of holding something as sacred that was so hard won for so many people.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, obviously, the intersections between faith and voting, especially in the South where we are, is significant. And even IPL's own board chair, obviously, Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley, plays a huge role in that, has played a huge role in that for a really long time.
Exactly.
So it's in a way, it's in the DNA of the work of IPL and Interfaith Power and Light.
It is, and you know, we really think that voting is an opportunity to embody our democracy. You know, we know that our democracy has really been under threat, and you know, it needs to work for all of us. It needs to work for everyone, and not just an entitled few. And so, you know, this is an opportunity in 2022, certainly back in 2020, we started our Faith Climate Justice Voter Campaign. And in 2022, we're taking that up again as another important election year. And I think keeping the right to vote in front of folks and making sure that folks are able to, you know, to express what they want in the world through their vote. You know, it's an expression of our values and how we want the world to be.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. I would love to hear a little bit more about the Faith Climate Justice Voter Campaign, and specifically, you know, obviously we're launching the campaign again this year. It has been launched. There's a training on the 31st of this month. So if you're interested in getting trained on how to get out the vote for your congregation, we'll have a link in the description so you can click that and register. But I'm interested in kind of why IPL chose to get involved in get out the vote work in 2020, and then why you think it's important to continue this work, and then obviously, the details of the campaign itself.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. Well, in 2020, well, even, backing up before 2020, we really thought that 2020 was a pivotal election year. And for a little while, IPL had been involved in, sort of in small ways with voting. So we had put forward a values voter guide in previous elections in partnership with some other organizations. And part of that was just as a way to provide information about various issues to folks who are in our network. And so it was always a multi-issue guide. But at the end of the day, of course, we know a lot of issues that we're all working on relate to climate and environmental justice. And so, trying to pull some of those issues together for folks so they could understand the issues better, and then, take a look at the candidates and make their own choices about who best express their own values. This is a 501c3 campaign, so we don't tell folks who to vote for, but we really do try to provide education and resources to folks so that they can best make their own choices. So our first real campaign in 2020, just worked to inspire people of faith and conscience to take what we call a critical climate action, and that is to vote. We know that we want particular outcomes for our world to better care for the environment, for our children and grandchildren's future, and that the earth, for so many of our religious traditions, is sacred, and we want to take care of that sacred gift and steward that sacred gift. So we collected voter pledges. We asked people to vote with climate in mind. We recruited faith leaders to give sermons. We distributed, again, a multi-issue voter guide in 2020, and provided a lot of other resources, for example, how to register to vote, where your polling place is. For many folks, they just don't know. And we also, I thought, in a really fantastic way, we voted, or we texted more than 230,000 people of faith who voted infrequently or not at all. And this was really an experiment that we ran in a few states, and encouraged folks to vote their values, and again, provided some resources for them. And the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication actually did an analysis of that campaign for us, and they showed that IPL's voter outreach program increased voter turnout by 1.7 percentage points. And that may not sound like a lot, but it's actually 3 times more effective than other benchmark campaigns that they've run. So texting infrequent voters who are climate alarmed, who consider themselves to be people of faith, and coming from a faith-based organization really does have an impact on getting people out to vote. So that was really exciting. And as you know, we also, part of that extension of that campaign we did in Georgia. We extended into the runoffs for the U.S. Senate and the Public Service Commission elections as well. So that came in at the tail end of our 2020 campaign. So we're excited to work with you on that.
Well, and we're excited to be one of the states where we're doing this campaign this year. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about, are there different ways that this campaign might look this year? Or is it going to follow the same trajectory? And what are you most excited about for this campaign?
Well, first of all, I'm really excited that Georgia is one of the key states that we're working with in 2022, along with Pennsylvania and Michigan. Of course, we're working across our IPL network of affiliates throughout the country. But these 3 key states in particular, we're putting a little more resources into to help all of you, really run with this campaign. And, you know, we learned a lot, I think, in 2020 from the outcomes of the campaign. Some of the things that worked well, some of the things that didn't work quite as well as we had hoped. And of course, in 2020, we had to make a big pivot because congregations who we normally might be working through were really shut down due to COVID and not meeting in person. So a lot of those in-person things weren't happening at all in 2020. So we're excited that many faith communities have opened back up or are doing some kind of hybrid model. So there'll be some opportunities for congregations to do more things in person, including collecting voter pledge cards, some of which we'll be getting out to folks. Also doing some studies around the Values Voter Guide that we'll again be distributing. And that's a great opportunity for congregations to do you know, a class or a study together and really discuss these issues that are meaningful to them and can inform the way that they will be taking action and voting. We're actually also upping the number of voters that we're hoping to reach during 2022 with this this campaign. So our goal is about 550,000 faith voters this year. So that's about double the number that we did the text banking with in 2020. And again, providing resources, you know, helping folks register to vote, understanding their polling place, you know, understanding really other things that are happening in their state that are going to perhaps have an impact on, you know, how and where they vote, whether that's voter identification laws or changes in polling places, things like that. And also, you know, just really equipping folks to understand that they're working, they're with other folks, right? They're working in solidarity with other people, which we think is really, really important. I know Georgia congregations have had a long history of things like Souls to the Polls, where they you know, carpool or help folks who aren't able to drive to get to polling places and go together and kind of make it a celebration. And we love seeing that kind of thing because we know it's so impactful when you feel like your vote has some power, right? And I think that's what John Lewis was talking about in this short reading as well.
Absolutely. Well, we're so excited to launch this campaign and to have congregations participate in this. The linkage between being able to vote, getting out the vote, and effective climate policies is so clear and so important for people in our network and in our work. You mentioned in that reading about, you know, the right to vote is sacred. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about that, but also connect it to the work that we do on kind of local, state, and especially federal policy issues. You know, this linkage between the right to vote is sacred and also the sort of prophetic call to get engaged at these big systemic political levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, one thing before I forget is just to let folks know that we have a voter registration portal that will allow them to just verify that their voter registration is current or they can register to vote there. So one place you can go is the website weall.vote/IPL. And that's a place you can check that your voter registration is current this year. So just wanted to mention that.
And we'll drop that in the chat for everybody, just so
great,
everyone's
really
aware.
appreciate that. And, you know, I think, you know, I want to back up and just say, you know, some folks might ask, like, sort of, why is it important for people of faith to engage in climate justice, engage in voting rights? And you know, one of the things that I think a lot about is how faiths are, you know, some of the oldest institutions on the planet. And, you know, as such, I feel like there's an opportunity for us to serve as an antidote to short-term thinking. You know, we tend to think in election cycles, we're talking about elections, but congregations and faith communities, you know, we think in terms of generations, we think in terms of centuries. You know, how many folks in Georgia you know, are members of congregations that are 100 years old, or that their parents or grandparents, you know, attended. And so, you know, this sort of long vision that we hold, I think, is a way that we can fight against this, you know, very short-term political thinking that happens, I think, as, you know, especially here in the US. And it's the kind of thinking that we need in order to solve the climate crisis. You know, we have to think long term. And you know, faiths, we own and steward buildings and land and forests and other property, you know, both here in the US and globally. And, you know, this is a sacred trust that we've been given. And, you know, faith is fundamental to so many people in the world, including, especially, I would say, those in the Southeast. By the way, I have a Georgia connection because, as Cody knows, I went to Emory University in Atlanta and got my graduate degree there. So I've lived in Georgia as well. And, you know, we trust our spiritual leaders for moral guidance, and climate change is a moral and spiritual issue. And so, you know, that to me is fundamental to why this work is important to us and to engage in as people of faith and conscience. And we have long been working on policy because, of course, I think policy is sort of where, you know, the human and the human world and sort of the political world connect, right? You know, policies are important. That's what sort of sets the way we do our work. And we want good policies, and we want policies that move us forward to the world that we envision. And so, you know, IPL and our state affiliates, and including Georgia, and the great work that the Georgia team is doing, you know, we work at the very local level, you know, city climate plans, climate action plans, you know, looking at infrastructure, solar policies, you know, all kinds of things that happen at the local level and also at the state level. And some of those things then carry up to the federal level. So we look at what can the federal government do to provide forward-thinking policies that will move us on climate. In 2021, of course, the infrastructure bill was passed, and we worked heavily on moving that through. It's not a climate bill, but it does have some climate provisions in it, and certainly helps with some of the adaptation and infrastructure that's needed in our states. And so that money will be coming down to the state level, and we hope states will be engaged in making sure it goes to good programs and projects. As well, we've spent a lot of time, as you know, Cody, working on the Build Back Better plan, and it's, you know, the rumors of its death are premature, we might say. We know that the climate provisions in Build Back Better have some opportunity to move forward in Congress, and so we're actually continuing our work on that. Any legislation that moves forward will hold a different name. It won't be called Build Back Better. It will pull out the climate provisions within that bill and move them separately, but it will still be through the reconciliation process, which is the way that Build Back Better was moving forward. And so there is some renewed momentum around that. We know that rightfully so, Congress and the president have been focused on the situation in Ukraine. And so, you know, it's been on hold just a little bit. But we do think we'll see new bill language maybe in May, which means voting could happen on that in late May or June, we're hoping. And we, you know, we're continuing to call on the president and Congress to, you know, to deliver on the promise that they made to the American people to act on climate. And this is a big part of what needs to happen. So we know we'll have opportunities for folks in Georgia and across the US to engage in advocacy on this reconciliation bill on climate.
Yeah, thank you for that update. Yeah, it's critical that we weigh in on that to get those climate provisions passed as soon as possible. Obviously, time is of the essence.
Right.
I wanted to take a slight shift as probably what will end up being our last question, which is that you were an executive director of an Interfaith Power Light affiliate. and then moved into the role of president of National Interfaith Power and Light some years ago. And I wonder, just the world's changed a bit since you moved into that role. And obviously, we're talking about things like voting rights, getting out the vote, federal climate policies in the midst of all sorts of local, regional, national, international conflicts and complications. And so for you, sitting at the head of Interfaith Power and Light, what's your hope for the network moving forward? What's your, what keeps you moving forward and doing this work and bringing everybody along? What are you aiming for? What are you hoping for?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I hope I'll work myself out of a job, right? I mean, we'll solve the thing and we'll all go off and do something else interesting and solve other problems in the world. But given that isn't probably happening in the next little while, it doesn't seem like, I came into this role, as you said, I served as a state affiliate director in Iowa. I grew up in the Midwest. And I really look at this role as a calling. I am ordained clergy, but this is my full-time ministry. And I take inspiration from our network. We have amazing leaders throughout the network, in our state affiliates, in our national office. And, ultimately, I think my goal has always been to build out our national voice as the faith-based climate justice organization in the US. And it takes all of us working together in order to build that vision. It's not sort of me saying, I'm going to implement this vision, right? It's the fact that we have built this amazing reputation for the work that is happening across the US. And we're the only national faith-based organization working on climate that has a national presence along with boots on the ground, right? The grassroots presence that it really takes in order for this work to be successful. And, I just want to keep us moving along together in that trajectory, and building this national voice and welcoming more folks. We know there are a lot of people in our world who are the spiritual but not religious. They might not be part of a local congregation, but they are steeped in values and are very spiritually grounded. And so building that bigger tent and making sure that there's a place for everyone in this as we work together to solve the climate crisis and to center justice in the work that we're doing. So ultimately, I guess that's my vision.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning and for leading us as the president of Interfaith Power and Light and instituting some of these programs and helping to support us along the way. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Of course. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Again, there's a registration the 31st of this month to learn how to run voter registration in your congregations. And then we will also link to where you can, the platform where you can check your voter registration, register to vote, and pledge to be a climate voter. I thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for another episode of Coffee and Something Stronger. Thank you, Reverend Hendershot.
Thank you.